What I would like to share with you is an experience in a part of my life where, unlike today, it is not that it has been bad, but different. Look, since I was born until I was 17 years old, my parents raised me in the same house. We never moved until years later. I was the only daughter. And what happened in that house? I feel that it was not like something from the other world because I grew up there and I felt it was more normal that next to my house the kitchen part, the rooms, the bathroom, only one door separated us from the business of my parents, a funeral. This business had been inherited to my father by my grandparents that I did not know, and since I was a child I always had the idea of seeing this as it is, a business. And don't get me wrong, it's a step we all have to take. And they always raised me with the mentality that they were clients who went through both the procedures and who my mother embalmed. It wasn't always her who took care of that. She had another employee who always helped her. And the point was to always respect everyone equally. Honestly, during my years living there, several things happened to me personally, even more to my parents, and there are others that they never told me, and it is that when these topics came up I preferred not to listen, not to know. We lived there, how would I want to hear that such a thing was happening, that this, that the other? I slept alone a few meters from where the lifeless bodies of people spent the night. I would like to start with the least traumatic, at least for me. One night, I remember very well all these experiences. I was about 12 years old and it was the first time that I thought beyond what I could see and so on. That night I was awakened by a very loud sound of a metal tray falling and hitting the floor. You know how objects of this material make quite a racket when they fall. And it had been clearly heard that he was coming from the funeral home. I get up, not so scared, the truth, still. But I stop at the door because I hear that my father was already running and crossing the funeral home door, screaming that who was there. I heard him moving things, lighting lights, opening and closing doors. And then he went away again in silence until he returned to the house and closed a metal door that was the one that connected the house to the business. I heard all this with the door between open, and it is that my parents had forbidden me to walk alone at night in the funeral and more when they had some body prepared, so I did not go out. I only heard when my father came to his room with my mother, I heard him say, "No, nothing's wrong. The girl is fine, that's all." I said it like nothing happened, and it didn't take me long to understand that they were referring to a girl they had prepared to watch over the next day. They had left her that same night. They had prepared her and knew they were referring to her. When I heard that they had closed the door of her room, I closed mine with confidence, I lay down, I covered my face and I started to pray. My mother had taught me that if something scared me, I would pray until I fell asleep. I don't know how, but it always worked for me, and that night was no exception. Nothing else happened. The next day I knew that the family had come for the girl. They did everything they had to and they left. And nothing else happened. But then I knew that this type of thing happened. After that day, that month, even a year, strange things continued to happen fortunately, so I would like to say small, although I am going to be honest, I never got used to it. I always lived with fear every time I heard that things were falling at night when there was no one. Sometimes I heard an old wooden door creaking, which was to enter the embalming room, and by this point my parents had told me to listen to what I listened to. It was normal. Many people did not know that they had left this world, they clung to this plane, but they always went the next day. That yes, in the meantime their bodies spent the night in the funeral. However, what happened, the straw that broke the camel's back, at least for me, is that one night, after a few years, I was 16, so I remember it as clearly as if it had happened to me at most last week. As on many occasions, before closing the premises, they brought my parents a body, a man of some 60 years, according to my father. The brother of that man had taken him to prepare the service, and the next day, as on many other occasions, they would pick him up after the funeral service. I arrived from the preparatory at night. I had dinner with my parents and, since none of us had any problem talking about the lifeless bodies with which we would work while we ate or dined, that night my father told us that the body they had carried that night was really very bad. My mother replied that she would have to get up even earlier to be able to have it ready in time, since he had died in very strange circumstances. My father told us that the brother of that man had brought that man after having found him. He would have lost his life in 2 days at most. But they said it wasn't that he might have met with an accident, that he might have gotten in bad steps, and you know what those people who have those shady businesses do, right? To that man they say they had offered him, so as my father said, he did not explain to him the man who had taken him. It is not that I would like to ask him, because this man was completely discarded, crying all the time when he saw the body. He says my father that he had as if they were tattoos all over the body. In fact, he does not know if in his last moments of life after his death, but that they were so recent, such strange symbols. The face, he doesn't know what they did to him. He didn't seem to have been hurt by anything, but they had deformed him intentionally, and they had also taken off his arm completely and his right leg and those limbs, says the man who never found him. Of course, I am telling you this with all the respect in the world, just as in time my parents worked with that place. I will only tell you what happened. We finished dinner, we talked a little more and went to sleep. Tomorrow I also had to get up early, so I went to my room. During the night I woke up thirsty, but now I didn't have my thermos with water as I used to. I suppose I fell asleep more than tired and had forgotten to fill it. I leave my room, turn on a light from the corridor, walk to the kitchen and, in the iron door that connected to the funeral home, behind a glass like blurred that had that door like the old ones, from the waist up, there was the silhouette of a person standing behind the door. I could only see everything dark coming from behind, except for a small light that left my father in the funeral room. If not, I wouldn't have seen that someone was standing behind that door. The silhouette, completely dark, of a man, stuck to that glass. It was the only thing I saw. He didn't move, he didn't get any closer. And when I noticed that, where the left arm of the silhouette should go, there was nothing, he had no arm. I quickly remembered what my father had told us, about that body that they had taken, and precisely that arm was missing. I screamed, like never before in my life. My father quickly left his room, almost running. I couldn't stop pointing at the door with my hand, trembling. I swear I almost fainted when I saw my father approaching, running with me. He also looking at the door, because his face highlighted it. He was also looking at it. The silhouette. I just saw that he was moving away from the glass, from the door, and he got lost. I fell in the kitchen, as we say in Mexico, descent and falling, sitting go. My father got me up, sat me in the chair, and my mother was already with us, in that my father takes a weapon that my grandfather had left him to protect precisely the place, and was already carrying it in his hand, turns on the lights, opens the door of the funeral home. I saw that he entered to walk it, and after a few minutes maybe he came back. Now it had taken longer to come back than all the occasions that I was going to check. When he came back, he closed the door, making sure that it had a key, in fact, also checking that it did not open with just pushing it. He approached me, telling me that nothing had happened, that it had only been a noise, that he had dreamed ugly, perhaps, that he had no reason to worry about me. And since I was already a little older compared to all the other times that scared me, I asked him, then why was he pointing that out? And my dad turned to see my mom, sat down with us and told us very seriously, "Don't get scared. Maybe tomorrow they'll come for him and that's it. Nothing happens. You know this happens sometimes when they don't want to go." But this man was moving around the funeral home. I found him lying behind the reception desk. And I had to get them off the floor. Your mom always helps me get them up. It's okay. But I had never seen that they would get so far from the floor, that they would cross the wooden door of the room, or that they would peek. They had never peeked here. I saw it, Devani. I saw it peeking out of the window. We'll see what we can do now, but he's not going to get up. Go to bed. Your mom and I will finish the service right now. I've always been sorry, but even though we've always had this whole thing about death and everything, knowing that they'd get up, move or do everything they shouldn't do, it never stopped scaring me. And never, even today at my 51 years. I don't forget it. I don't forget that silhouette of that body peeking through the door. If he was trying to cross into our house or what, I don't know. I never knew if it was really the reason why, after that night, things in the place, the house, changed. Fortunately, the business always stayed. That never changed. But the house didn't feel good again, safe. Every service that he had to stay here until the next day. He knew that not only I lived with that fear that something like this was going to happen again. My dad told us that this would only be one occasion. That something had that man, because he made this world clear. Or even that it was not even him, that maybe they had worked on it, in terms of witchcraft, or I do not know, but that it would not happen again. However, after a while my father sold the place. It did not take a week to get a buyer. After that, again, I arrived one night at the house and my parents were outside the place looking inwards. With the phone in hand calling someone, and scared, I saw my dad. Like that time we saw that his body had been sunk in the glass. A week later we moved. They never wanted to tell me what had happened that night, and I really didn't want to know either. And since my dad sold it at a very good price, it served to continue with another business that fortunately went very well. Better than the funeral home, in fact. So, at least all that was left behind from one day to the next. And nothing strange happened to us again, but I always wondered if for some reason somebody would do that again, or even that nights. If he had entered the house, what would have happened? I'm going to tell you an experience from last year. Since last year I was still studying at the university, I stayed until 4 or 5 in the morning doing homework. This was very recurrent, and nothing strange had ever happened to me, neither day, nor night, nor at that time. I don't know where or how, I swear, but it happened to me almost every month that I couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes and there I began to imagine very ugly things of all kinds. I didn't know where this fear came from, if it was more my imagination or I don't know, but when I did manage to sleep, I always dreamed of pure bad things, nightmares rather. I dreamed that they took my life, that they came in to rob my house, they chased me, but it was always everything inside my house. When that month passed, in which I attributed everything to, I don't know, some stress situation, although at that time I couldn't get through anything tense, really. That time went by slower than anything because I couldn't rest well, not understanding what was happening. The following month things got a little more serious. On one occasion I was in my room during the night doing homework. Suddenly, in one of the drawers in my closet from the inside, it started to sound as if an animal was scratching the most desperate. I had nothing that could do that. Pets, I even thought of some toy doll that had some function like that, but no. In fact, I had almost nothing of that, because most of them had been given to my younger cousins, and the ones I still had, it was impossible for them to do that. So I had to convince myself that maybe I had been a rat, although I was sure it wasn't like that. The second night that something strange happened to me that month, I was about to sleep at about 3 a.m. I turned off the lights, closed the door of my room, lay down in my bed, and I feel fast that at the height of my feet someone sits down. Of course, in the dark I did not see anything. Then I felt that whatever it was moving around the mattress, but always at that height. I couldn't do anything else because suddenly it felt like something or someone was pulling the sheets. I knew I couldn't just pretend nothing was happening, ignore it. Because there was clearly something down there. But I didn't feel like I could run either. So I started praying everything I knew, over and over, while I felt how they kept pulling the sheet, not slow or soft, but strong and insistent, as if clearly wanting to take it off me. After a few seconds in which I didn't even realize how much time had passed, everything stopped. I couldn't sleep that night, I couldn't get up either, the night just went by and it dawned. I know I'm telling you this without further ado, as things happened and that's it, but there's no other way to tell you. That's what happened to me, from one day to the next, all of a sudden at night, without a warning. Like the next night, in which I was clearly more than tired of not being able to rest well. I go to bed late at night, and I hear the door of my room knock. I ask from my bed who it is. Nobody answers me. So I get up. I open the door and nobody. I thought it might have been my mother or even my brother, but neither of them was already awake at that time, much less were they playing jokes like that. I said to myself, well, maybe I confused the sound. I dreamed of it while asleep and awake and nothing happened. In reality, if I didn't hear anything else again, I would be right about that. And so it was. I was able to sleep with that in mind that night. 2 or 3 days later, the same thing. I was just about to sleep, and forgive me for the perhaps repetitive part of my story. I looked at my phone to reconcile the dream, and in the door, as if it were stuck with the mouth to the wood of the door, a girl was talking. At home there was never a little girl. I thought, maybe the neighbors, but it didn't make sense. It was very late at night. So, what was a girl doing there? I took the solution of starting to pray for him to leave, and only then did he remain silent. And if you ask me, I did not understand anything. It was as if, due to the fact of having my mouth stuck to the door, I could not understand him. A few days passed. The nights calmed down. Nothing strange happened anymore. I was in the kitchen making myself something to eat, and, in the light of the day, unlike the previous occasions, I feel as if someone behind me with his hands begins to suffocate me. I move. I try to take off some hands that I didn't feel when I was looking for them with my own hands. There was no one, but I felt that they were pressing me very hard, so much so that I no longer had any oxygen. Out of nowhere they let me go. I turned to see who had done that, but I was completely alone. I was crying, scared until my mom arrived. I told her everything that had been happening to me for a long time, and the solution, no matter how impossible it seems, was to pray in every corner of the house. Just like that, it's like all that stopped. As I told you, it may not make sense for these things to happen so suddenly. In my house, where nothing strange had ever happened to us, neither to me nor to anyone. I don't know what you may think, and if you have any answer, theory or whatever, you would really help me a lot, more than anything, to understand why everything could have happened like that out of nowhere. The reason why I write to you on this first occasion, since I intend to tell you little by little the things that I had to live both alone and in company. I have not experienced as many things as it may sound, but the others are a little more extensive. That's why, more than anything. 3 years ago, months before this whole pandemic issue started, I worked in a hospital, at that time in the state of Durango, the unit in which I was less than a year. Since being a forensic technician, there was more to cover a position than to seek to remain there. The job offer was very good, but I preferred to be close to my mother, since I was going through a cancer that, although it was recovering favorably, I didn't like it either. I was alone for many days living his recovery, so it was that time later I stopped working there, but after 4 months of going there, day after day, without a break, sharing the work area with very few waiters, just a forensic doctor, his assistant, a 28-year-old girl, and me. The place was always very quiet. The hospital was big, private, but I don't know exactly why there was a line of renunciations at that time. So they had to cover the posts, because workers are missing every day. But patience is always there, and that's how I got in for a while. The reason for the renunciations never had to do with something paranormal. It was said out there that it was more for reasons that they were bad with the benefits and things like that, and for that they accepted the positions elsewhere. This is important that I mention them so that you don't think that what happened to me is aimed at scaring the staff, and that's why they left. No, none of that. The forensic doctor was a man of about 58 years, very devoted to his profession, and since the first time I heard something strange that should not be there somewhere in the morgue, he made it clear to me that he never ruled out that paranormal events should occur. Yes, I think the majority of us have heard that from time to time bodies move, properties of human anatomy after leaving this world. Esperable, of course. But I mean unusual noises. Steps. When it is assumed that there should be no one around to set an example. He did accept what happened. What we had to hear. Anyway, it never happened to that noise and that's it. And he told us that, no, we couldn't explain some things. But that we should not be afraid of them either, that they were simply people who did not want to go yet, and that is why they were still walking from one side to the other down there. And I mean down because the morgue of the hospital was to the floor below. Then, even more clearly, we heard every noise. The door of the stairs, the elevator, even though, all of a sudden, we left recharged. I don't know, a scalpel. In the steel drawer, it was heard. Maybe you think I'm exaggerating, but if you don't believe me, and one day, let's hope not for bad news or anything. Visit the morgue. Pay attention to all the silence that is made when there are not many people, or at least in the ones in which I have been, so it has touched me precisely for that reason. It is that one afternoon there was not much movement at that time, at least in the morgue, so that when everyone made their pending, and I mean the doctor and me, since his assistant was just coming back from dinner, comes with us to an office that we had next to the room where the freezers were, the plates, and tells us, listen, what happened, why did they bring the lady back? The doctor turned to me to see how between annoyed, confused, and he asks me quickly that if I had taken her out, that why if we had already finished with her. I'm not going to lie to you, I did get a little upset, because he assumed I had taken her out when it wasn't like that. And I reminded him that we were both present when I left her in her assigned freezer. I slipped her inside and closed the door. And he relaxed his face quickly, speaking of his expression, of course, as if he had lost his anger quickly, and he told us, forgive me, Mario. Yes, it's true. No, it wasn't you. Judith, you didn't move her either, right? The assistant, whom we will call Judith, is not her real name. I don't know if she's still working there, but just in case you doubted. She answered no, a little scared. Maybe because she felt so good that the doctor thought it was her. When the doctor heard her deny it, he asked us to accompany him. We got up, we walked only to the side of that office, and upon entering, indeed, there was the body of a lady who had arrived that day in the morning, a woman of about 40 years, lying upside down but with her hand hanging under the plank. We went in to accommodate her in what the doctor asked her that. Then, what had happened? I did not think first in something paranormal, the truth. In fact, the gentleman did not, or at least it was the first thing he wanted to rule out, that it was of another nature, because he told us, boys, in my career, to maintain my good performance, history, reputation, everything they want, you will always prefer that if suddenly a body moves from place, it seems that they load it and place it somewhere else. It moves or even opens up a wound. They will prefer it to be something paranormal. If they think about it with a colder head, they will even realize that it has no consequences at all. If instead, someone alive, someone malicious, someone from the hospital is moving them from place to place looking for I don't know what to alter the body, that is serious. So, the first thing we are going to do right now is confirm that no one has entered. No door has been opened, neither the stairs nor the elevator. We listened to you, Judith, no problem as always when you got off. So, no, there is no one hidden. I'm telling the truth to the doctor. At that time, and now I understand that it's true. He also told us that he heard that, all of a sudden, in other hospitals, they told us that they even got to lose bodies. For no logical reason. Some possibility that someone had entered. Excluding, of course, those occasions where bad people took them. But that in this hospital, it has never happened, fortunately. Then after that he began to tell us something strange. For me, it was the first time I heard someone tell something so close to him that only one door of the freezer separated us from whoever told us this. Judith, Mario, look, this body did not move by the work of the Holy Spirit or any living being. Since the lady arrived, she has not wanted to stay in the freezer. You see that when she arrived, I received her, about 2 hours before you arrived, and a chaperone who was helping me was witness to that. When we put her in the first time, not a minute passed, I swear, boys, so that he and I could hear that lady pushing the door. We'll open it quickly, we don't have to wait, and you know that for anything. And the lady was as if nothing could be any involuntary movement because her head was close to the door and she had no way of pushing it to be the case the way she was lying down. Well, it could be anything. Nothing happened, but today is the second time she leaves the freezer. A while ago, when I was alone, and before I got here to the living room and the door to the freezer was open. Not only that, but she was also outside. Not on the floor, nor on the plank, no. Completely outside, but on the rail with which the plank of the freezer moves. I don't know how it happened, but she left. While he was telling us this, he would return her to her place. We didn't know what to say, what we could say. Just listen and wait for us to finish with that body. She would leave later. After that, each one went to his own. The doctor had his lunch hour, his assistant Judith to finish archiving some reports, and I really fell asleep for a while in the office. Judith's voice whispered to me and woke me up. I had fallen asleep, loaded with arms on the desk, sitting in the chair, and when I raised my face and saw her, she looked scared. She was inside the office with the door closed, breathing very agitated. I stood up, asking her what had happened, if everything was fine. Seriously, she looked very bad. She tells me, stammering, "Mario, the lady is walking." With all the sincerity in the world, all my blood ran down at that moment. And it's not that I didn't want her to realize that I really was scared of what she had said, but I thought it couldn't be true. It's not possible for bodies to walk after they've died, nor in the first hours. Steps like that, no, but her face. I couldn't doubt what she was telling me. I asked her again what she had seen, if she saw anyone else in the room or how that was. She couldn't say anything. She tried to talk, however, she had a tremendous, very, very heavy anxiety attack. She understood less and less. She fell to the ground. Now she was crying. It was clear that she was not joking or lying. If they had seen her, really, it is one of those times that there is no way to deny that that person saw something and that it caused that emotion so strong. I asked her to wait for me in the office while I looked for the doctor to review or something. With fear, yes, that fear could never leave me, but I had to move. It was true what the man had told us, we had to take care of our performance. As I left the office and as I listened to Judith keep crying behind the door, poor thing. I feel so bad for having left her alone, but I had to go and check. Maybe I had seen someone else wrong, or who knows. In that, when I was leaving the corridor, the doors of the elevator open, the doctor comes out, sees my face and begins to walk quickly towards me, asking me, "Mario, what happened to you?" I don't know what he looked like, but he had noticed her in less than a second. I told him with doubts that Judith had seen something in the freezer room and was going to go check it. He put his hand on my shoulder, as if he were pitying me because his attitude was like that. He said to me, "Of course, let's see what happened." What did he tell you? Before I could tell him what his assistant had told me, and for the fact that the rooms were very close to where I was, I couldn't tell him anything, because it was strange to see the door of the freezer room open only a little. It was two doors, but one was only centimeters away from being completely matched with the other and being completely closed. In that, the doctor opens that door and lets the head of that lady fall, the one that once and for all had been returned to the freezer. It was not just the head, but it was as if she was lying on the floor and only her head had been loaded on that door, so it was not well closed. Both the doctor and I were surprised, and almost in a complete jump we went back, scared of course, and even more so because the appearance of that woman was nothing, and I say this with all the respect in the world, but she looked so strange now. The eyes were completely open, but they were those people who have such big eyes that if they made an effort it even seemed as if they were going to come out. Looking up with his mouth completely open. That was the first time I saw the doctor with that expression, scared. He asked me for help quickly to lift her before someone came and could lend himself to misinterpretations. We carried her, I, with fear that she would move, And it was also the first time, already in the professional field, that I was afraid that a body would move. And I couldn't forget what the assistant had told me. When we put her on the plank to check her and everything, I started telling the doctor what Judith had told me, that I had seen her walking. If before the man looked scared, now he was much worse. He turned to see her with his eyes wide open, between annoyed, confused and scared. And said that he did believe it. He asked me if I had not realized that he was getting closer and closer to the door every time. I had not noticed it, but it was true. I asked him first of all what we should do with her. His family had not yet come, so we did not know exactly when he was going to leave. Talk and pray with her. There's no other way, Mario. It's not going to do anything, I assure you. It's going to scare us like that because it's scared. Imagine you losing your life. Not knowing where you are, what happened to you, not seeing anyone you know and seeing that you're in a freezer. Well, if that's the case, it must be horrible. That's why he couldn't go. Right now, we're going to leave her here and we're going to go quickly with Judith. We're going to see how she is. After going to the office with her, confirmed that she was a little better, still a little accelerated, but better. I could talk. We asked her if she wanted to come, but she said no, that she better wait for us. The doctor and I were talking about her from time to time. We prayed one or the other prayer asking for the lady and explaining to the body that he had already left, that we were only doing our job and that his family would soon come, but he had to let us work. We took our time and my voice was shaking for being in front of that lady, but all that remained of that day and the next, nothing strange happened to us with her again, and thank God that it was so. I'm going to tell you an experience I lived my 30 years. Paranormal, of course. But I feel like it wasn't like I would have expected to live if something like this happened to me. Like I've heard what happens when you see someone who shouldn't be there. Well, I don't want to go ahead. In the year of 2017, my grandma at 94 years old was such a lively, active, cheerful person. You could see her going from top to bottom like nothing. That's why, every morning I went out to the balcony. She sat in one of the chairs we had there and stayed watching me until she made sure to see me get in my car. The last week she unfortunately lived, she spent it entering and leaving the hospital. That she always should be hospitalized, that she always shouldn't. That they were just reviews. And on one of those days in which I fortunately coincided that I was at home, she was sleeping lying in her bed. I remember that I said goodbye, I gave her a kiss. See you later, Grandma, I love you, and I left. When that night I arrived at my house, I did not see her. It turns out that they had taken her back to the hospital. I stayed waiting for them to return with her. However, this time it was not so. My mom and an uncle called me to let me know that she had passed away. Days passed, his velour and I, as every morning, got up very early to go to work. I left my house, I closed the door, I walked to my car, and before I got on, I saw my grandma on the balcony, sitting in the chair as always. She made me the sign with her hand up, saying goodbye to me. I don't know if out of reflection or what, but I said goodbye to her too, doing it with my hand. I got in my car, looked back at the balcony, and I wasn't there anymore. There I realized that I didn't feel fear, as we expect in some event without paranormal explanation, but pleasure and happiness of seeing her again, since I understood that she had done that to be able to say goodbye to me. During the pandemic I went through a very difficult process for me, in which I ended up divorcing my partner, with whom I was barely 3 years married. I suppose that living locked up by all this health issue took out all the differences we had in the light more than our things in common. For all this is that I fell into a severe depression that ended up affecting my work life as well, since I almost lose my job. I was at the test all the time and this was synonymous with more and more stress. So I decided to get help. However, at least near my house, I didn't know how to get help. The mental health checkup was a bit expensive. Also considering that I was separating and I had to cover more and more expenses. In my job I didn't know if I was going to continue, and who knows if I could pay a therapist without that money missing me later. So in my desperation I had to look for other alternatives. I didn't know what to do, who to look for, but I needed something. Looking on the internet, I found several self-help groups, some much cheaper or even free. There it was. As I attended my first meeting with people who were also going through or had gone through similar situations, the first sessions helped me a lot. They really helped me get out of the well I was in. I closed some cycles I had needed for a long time. I changed my thoughts about life and, yes, I was feeling better. So I was entirely grateful to the people who helped us. With this organization where each of the members were so serviceable that it didn't seem like they did it for charity. When I finished my process, after not so long, it was about 6 weeks at most, they offered me to be a volunteer to help the people who were integrating into these therapeutic groups, something that I immediately accepted, since I felt indebted to them, in addition to the fact that I was doing very well with all the members, mostly pure people above 30 years old. And I saw the opportunity to socialize a little more after spending 2 years completely locked up like everyone else. As time went by, I got to know more about this whole organization, and I was realizing things that I didn't like at all. For example, I saw how, apparently, there was a filter to admit people who asked for help. That is, they didn't accept everyone in these groups, but only a few. They rejected mothers or single fathers. To those of low socioeconomic level, to those who had tattoos or perforations, to all those who did not have preferences that the woman liked the man and the man the woman, and above all to those who were not of white Tess. I had not realized that, for all the things I had in my head at that time, but yes, all the people who were there. We coincided in physical characteristics. I think I'm not as intelligent as maybe the majority, or maybe I didn't pay enough attention, so I took a long time to realize all these signals. I think I even maybe just worried about helping that I didn't notice that. But when I realized it, I became more observant, so much so that I discovered that this organization had no benefit. They asked me to attend other meetings, but only for members of this organization. There they began to read what were the values of that group, what they were looking for, which seemed more like disguised rules of a completely social discourse, as if they were not values but ways of thinking of people. Then I went to a party that day at night in which everyone spoke to you of how great it was to climb positions within this organization, until after a few days, and in short, they were asking me for money to be able to climb, or to give them some of my possessions like my car or apartment, that I was still fighting the property with my ex-wife, this to later according to them pay but not stay without ascending in rank, that according to was urgent for I don't know what thing flat. This was already strange. Although the last option they gave me was to enter people with the profile they were looking for, and so I didn't have to give anything or pay any money. But I would continue to go up in position. I tell you, it was completely strange and everything. I didn't know how to get out of all this, since it came to a point where the way they started to harass me was annoying. I was already out of the warehouse where we were meeting. It was not enough to simply stop going and ready, so I began to invent excuses to be absent and move away little by little, but no, it did not work, since they were now going to my house or waiting for me outside my work to take me with invitations so insistent that I felt more like an obligation, because according to their own words I was already an indispensable member. I don't know why, honestly. If I didn't even share their ideals. The worst part is that the ideology of this cult was very risky for the others, since due to their beliefs and the exclusions they had with other people, they firmly believed in a superior race. That's how it sounds, so mischievous. Well, they thought that. They said that this race should rule in Mexico. I think that at this point it is obvious to think that they had very influenced inspirations by you-know-who, thereby Germany in those dark years. So much so that they even financed works or contributed with other organizations that were in charge of urbanizing and remodeling rural areas to get the natives who lived in remote areas. And it shows. I don't know if anyone lives in these directions, but there are areas that before the pandemic were completely rural, and now they are completely different, urbanized at a step more than accelerated. Trying to end the places where many indigenous communities still live, said with all respect and affection, of course. Although fortunately it was not so common, it was noticeable, but not as much as they wanted, since the government rarely gave these territories to these companies. The only way I could get rid of them was on one occasion, in which during a meeting I activated the recorder on my phone and recorded only one of those hateful speeches, but disguised as cheap ideologies to reinforce all those discriminations. So when they insisted on coming back, I told them to leave me alone, or that I would start to disclose that recording where they really expressed themselves, so horrible of the people, and that I would give it to the police. I had understood that they were not people like those sects or cults that disappear people if they need, with their own hands, or I don't know. They did everything through this that I told you. They didn't want, or they were going to stain their hands. I don't know how to explain it. I could give myself that luxury of having them under that condition far from me, something that they accepted, forcing me to delete that recording, something that made them believe that it would be like that. But obviously that didn't happen. Currently this organization or group of help is still working. However, I have a friend who works in the prosecutor's office, and they are supposedly already investigating. For that same reason I have not commented which one it is precisely, because in fact if they do the search on Facebook that group is going to appear to them. And I must keep those details for now without specifying, so as not to hinder the case, according to what they told me. I hope there will soon be news of the case, and so you know that what I have just told you is completely real. It is terror, yes, but to those people who do not care about the lives of others so that their ideals are fulfilled. One of my experiences in the Social Security where I work. When I arrived at an area behind the hospital where the morgue is located, I went directly to one of my work areas, the administrative area, and in that I coincide with a colleague who was also precisely there. He also had that area assigned, the administrative area, only specifically of the morgue, to carry the death cards, for example, things that have to be done by law when a body arrives. Well, he was in charge of that and other things, so it was frequent to see him around there, and on that occasion he had arrived there more than anything to clear my head a little. He didn't have many pending tasks, the day was calm, and I told him. To what he asks me, do you want me to tell you one of the experiences that have happened to me in the morgue? And I of course wanted to hear them. We got comfortable taking advantage that there was not much to do in that area at that time, and he begins to tell me a little while ago, we got a little girl, man, who unfortunately had died in an accident. This girl, since she got here, had an expression of annoyance, like this, she was more than rigid. It's normal, of course, you know, but it happened one day, since her family hadn't arrived to recognize the body yet, and she was still the same. We couldn't work with her. Her little arms and legs were very hard, no way, and we can't force a body either. After a day, a family member finally arrives, her mother. I don't even want to imagine the pain that must be felt when going to recognize the body of a daughter or a son. The mother was told where she was so that she could enter. We left her alone at that moment because, you know, it's not easy. Suddenly we heard the lady scream. She started asking us to help her, to do something. While she was crying, we saw her next to the plank where the girl was lying. We said, "Ma'am, what happened? Come with us." And she told us that her daughter was alive, that we should help her. When we saw the little girl we knew that that was impossible, but the mother told us that she had heard her, that when she approached she crouched down to cry near the body. She clearly heard her daughter, because she said that it had been her voice. She had thanked her for having gone to say goodbye. The mother gets up and, although she sees her daughter as she was the one who started screaming for help. After we could calm her down, she left. We did everything we could, and I swear that after her mother came we were able to work with her. She was no longer stiff, even her face looked calm, as if you were seeing a girl sleeping. Throughout my life things have happened to me. I would dare to say that of a paranormal nature. I feel that many of the things I lived have to do with my paternal great-grandmother. She did and undid witchcraft works, and her husband, my great-grandfather, did black magic works, only intended to harm people. I always attributed it to that, therefore, all my life I grew up with my family always telling me not to wish bad things on people because they will be fulfilled and they will be returned to you, or not to go to sleep angry, upset because they said that bad things could happen. This leads me to remember an occasion in which in the year of August the 1st, remember well, when we were all in full confinement for all this matter of the pandemic in full August. In August, at least here in Mexicali, the heat was at all that gave. We did not know with what to entertain ourselves, how to pass the time, and we did everything we put ourselves to clean the house. Between my sisters we watched television, but even so I felt very bad mood. Really, it was much the heat that plainly did not help us with the mood. My mother that day went out to buy some things that were missing to prepare the food. I was just going to sit in the living room chair for a while when I see that the puppy of my sister Juanchito got up before me and came down again. Everything that I had already left ordered. I am going to be honest, I did not do anything bad to Juanchito. I am completely against harming the animals, much less those who live in your own roof, and I tell you this because I was annoyed by what he had done, so I yelled at him, scolding him. I loaded him and I pretended to throw him to the ground. Of course I didn't do it seriously. I didn't even go down with force, quite the opposite. It was a kind of game, but I must admit that my scream and my scolding were serious. My sister, Catherine, I suppose she saw everything without understanding that I had not done it seriously, since she began to scream at me, asking me why I was doing that I was hurting him. In that my mother arrives from the store and she told him what she saw that I did, and my mother, because with all the heat from the outside of bad, I do not blame her, also began to scream at me in a very ugly way. We said each other of words. I threw even a broom that I brought in the hand and I went to my room, more than upset. In my room to almost 50 degrees without air conditioning, nothing with that to refresh me, that it was not a fan there. They had me angry, upset, with all the pride on top of not wanting to talk to them or see them. I cried of courage in my bed even, and with all the heat on top. My pride is that I never went down by water. I preferred to stay up there being courageous. And so time passed, the day, the hours, night. My mother went up to my room, entered with a plate of food and water, and the truth is that I regret everything I did at that time, but I did nothing but run from my room telling her that I didn't want her to leave. Still upset total, my mother scolded me. She got upset. She left the food and the glass with water in my room and left without me taking at any time anything that she had left for me, and so night came. I slept. I woke up. It was difficult to sleep because of the heat, so I had intermittent sleep, and it is necessary that I mention this, for what happened. At about 3 a.m., I remember very well that the bathroom light woke me up, which entered through a skylight that was connected to my room in that bathroom. It means that someone had entered. Not only that, but I see the time on my phone. 3:30 a.m. I also see a WhatsApp message from my dad. I had my phone locked, but I could see that she had only told me to call her. I was still upset, so I just put my phone aside, ignoring him. But, in that, my mother opened the door to my room, without touching anything, nor had I heard her come closer. When she enters and stands at the entrance, seeing only her silhouette, I ask her what she needed, and she only answered me, "Your dad sent you a message." I something rude respond to him, "Yes, I know." And she answers me very calmly, without reacting to the way I was responding to her, simply telling me, "Call him." Mark it, you have a cell phone and a fixed phone apart. You saw what time it is. I answered. I see her remain silent, I suppose looking at me because I could not see more than her silhouette, barely illuminated by the light of the bathroom that entered through that glass block or chandelier as you know it. As he saw that my mother was not going to tell me anything, I told him to go and turn off the bathroom light and close the door, and already lying down I only see that at the same time as he closes the door very slowly. In fact, the bathroom light goes out. The next morning I realized it by recapitulating, and it was not difficult for me to remember it, like when you dream of something and it is difficult for you to remember things. Well, I had no difficulty in remembering everything, so yes. I was sure that I had not dreamed that. When my mother left my room, I did not hear a single step through the house, or the door of her room close, as I could easily distinguish every time she left or entered, or at least hear the stairs when she went down, since her room is on the first floor. Even so, in the morning I complained to my mother for having bothered me so late, and she listens to me and sees me with a confused face, and I ask myself, well, what time? I told her not to do it. I told her everything about the night and she told me that no, it was not possible. Both she and my father were asleep at that time. In fact, my father had arrived more than tired that day, and no, he was not sending messages, he had not woken up. I took my phone to show him my father's message. I unlocked the screen and I did not find that message anywhere. I went into conversation with my dad, but there was nothing. Not even a warning that he had deleted the message. Nothing. My mother just stood there watching weird and left. I didn't know what to tell him either, but I was sure of what I had lived and it hadn't been a dream. Moments later, my sister tells me, "Okay, here are the horror stories compiled and edited for a more seamless reading experience." Story 1. A friend of my sister's, let's call him Flavio, told me he was like a medium and saw things others didn't. That morning, he told my sister in a message that he'd seen someone talking to me at night, from the entrance of my room. He said that if it spoke to me again, pretending to be my mother, I shouldn't listen or approach it. I was already uneasy, and this made it worse. It was after this that I made sure not to go to sleep angry, not wanting a repeat of whatever that was. Story 2. I want to tell you about something my family and I experienced 3 years ago, on a Saturday in February, before the pandemic. My parents decided to take my 2 younger siblings to the park. Everything was fine, they had fun and walked around. Later that night, after we were home, my parents, wanting to avoid disturbing us, went to discuss something in an unfinished room in the house. It didn't have a door or windows, but the wiring and light were installed. After a while, I heard my father screaming from that room, "Ale, come quickly. I don't know what's wrong with your mom, hurry." I ran into the room and saw the light had burst. The room was dark, and my dad was desperately looking at my mom, not knowing what to do. When I turned to see her, my mother was convulsing on the floor. We were helpless. After a minute, she reacted and was still for a bit. My father quickly hugged her, picked her up, and took her inside. Ever since that night, I've had constant chills. Scars on my arm that are always scratched. Something wasn't right. My mother had never convulsed before. Inside the house, it was even worse. When I got to my parents' room, where my mother was sitting, the look on her face. You can't imagine. Everyone knows their parents' facial expressions, but this was something I'd never seen before. I swear it wasn't her. Her gaze seemed to look directly at us, but at the same time, she seemed to be somewhere else. Her eyes were lost and fixed on my dad or me, taking turns. And that smile. My mother wasn't capable of that. My parents and the rest of my family have always told us that if we see or experience something strange, we should pray. So, I started praying the Our Father in a low voice while my father tried to talk to my mother. She didn't answer him. Suddenly, she started yelling at me angrily, telling me to shut up, that it hurt her head to listen to me. That's when everything became even worse. I was scared to see her like that. I knew something was wrong, but hearing her say that was the final straw. My mother was the one who always insisted on praying every night and going to Mass. She taught us the prayers. She was very Catholic, and for her to say that, it couldn't be her. Eventually, she just fell asleep. Neither my father nor I knew what to say, and we didn't want to talk about it that night. We said good night, left the doors open, and went to our rooms. I couldn't stop thinking about it, scared, but I was exhausted, so I managed to fall asleep. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, my mother woke us up, screaming horribly. I'm sure the neighbors thought we were hurting her. I ran to my parents' room and saw my mother thrashing alone. My father couldn't stop her. She was trying to hurt herself, looking angry. My dad told me to grab one of the rosaries from her dresser and start praying again. I didn't hesitate, despite the fear. I prayed as I had before, and she fell asleep again, just like that. She slept through the night, except for my dad and me. How could we sleep after all that? We made up a story for my siblings to keep them from knowing what was happening. When dawn broke on Sunday, we went straight to the first mass, taking my mother with us, of course. Only my father and I went. She was still so strange. We didn't know what to do. Maybe we should have consulted someone, but we didn't know who to turn to. We weren't prepared for this. It's not like this happened every day. So, we did what we thought was best. Before entering the church, carrying my mother, my father and I felt that she seemed calmer, but it still didn't feel like the woman we knew. At the entrance, she resisted, telling us not to go in, that she was sleepy, that her head hurt, and that we should go home. We ignored her. During Mass, in the back, my mother started hitting her head against one of the benches. She was crying so hard that everyone turned to look. Everyone there witnessed it. We left the church as quickly as we could. Arriving home, she didn't get up all day. She wouldn't drink any water, no matter how much my father insisted. That night, I can't describe it. It wasn't my mom. I didn't want to be near her anymore, and I could see the fear in my dad's face too. I didn't want to leave him alone with her. I was so afraid that I couldn't pray with him. Again, my mother started screaming. I ran to their room to see if my dad needed help. I saw my dad sprinkling her with holy water from a bottle they kept in the kitchen. My mother was screaming that it was burning her. But she was crying so falsely. My father stopped because he thought it really hurt her. Then, she started laughing. My dad, I don't know why, decided to ask my mother what she wanted, what we had done to her, or what my mama wanted us to do. Then, he asked her what her name was. To this day, it's a name I don't like. My mother, or whoever was supposed to be my mother at that time, said her name was Tanya. And no, it wasn't her real name. She started saying that she wasn't going to hurt my little brothers, that she didn't want anything to happen to them. I didn't understand. What was she talking about? Who was she? My mother, another person, or what? That night, my father couldn't be with her. He could see it wasn't good. So, I decided to stay with her, praying all night or until I fell asleep, reading whatever was in the Bible. That calmed things down, fortunately. Every now and then, she would lift her head, stare at me, and then lie back down. On Monday morning, my grandparents arrived after my father told them what was happening. After a while in his room, my grandparents and my parents left. My father told me that they went to see a priest at a church about 15 minutes away. As I didn't go, my father told me that as soon as they got out of the car, the priest understood what was happening. My dad said that a group of dogs started howling so badly that he will never forget it. They entered the church and prayed. The priest told my grandparents and my dad that there was another soul, not a demon, but the soul of someone else who wanted to stay in my mom's body. When they returned home, my mother looked much better. There was something of her in her face, apart from the tiredness, very pale. She told us that on Saturday, when she started convulsing, she felt something crushing her, something very heavy that wouldn't let her move. She felt like her ribs were going to break. She felt a coldness from her feet up to her head. And then, she didn't remember anything else. A week passed. My mom couldn't stay alone at home. She was scared. My dad and I took turns accompanying her when she didn't have anyone at home. My little siblings were there, but we didn't want to leave them alone with her. I remember she sometimes called us, very scared, crying. She said that someone was on the roof, walking around like looking for an entrance, that they touched the window, that it was Tanya. She hadn't left. She told us that sometimes she saw her through the window standing in the middle of the street at night, outside the house, looking in. But at least she wasn't inside anymore. We called the priest again to bless the house. And it seems that worked. Little by little, my mother called us less and less. Thank God, things improved. The fear never goes away completely, at least for me. I can't forget her face, how she screamed, the way she convulsed. And even though it only lasted a weekend, it felt like an eternity. We never found out exactly what happened. Maybe someone died in that house a long time ago, a woman. Perhaps it has to do with something my dad said a long time ago. Once, when he was sleeping alone in that same house, he felt that someone completely invisible was touching him suggestively. He told us, ashamed, that it was a woman too. Story 3. Many years ago, we lived in my paternal grandparents' house. It was a spacious, 2-story house. My mom and dad told me that before I was born, they would wake up in the middle of the night and see my grandfather get up, walk silently, carrying a bag of money. He would sit down and start counting the coins one by one. They also saw him talking to someone in a low voice, someone who was supposed to be sitting on an empty bench in front of him. I thought they were just trying to scare me. However, as I grew up, my uncles told me the same thing. Still, I didn't believe it. When I was about 11 or 12, my cousins and I asked my grandparents if we could sleep in their room. We wanted to see if what our parents told us was true. My grandparents agreed. Their room was huge, and we all fit comfortably. My grandparents slept in separate beds. We all pretended to fall asleep before my grandparents said good night. Hours passed, and I was excited. It felt like a game. It was late, but I knew my cousins were still awake like me, waiting. Then, I saw my grandfather get up slowly, not wanting to make any noise. He checked on my cousins and then came over to us. He peered at us and walked slowly to a part of the room. He grabbed a little bench from the wall and carefully placed it near his bed. We saw him take out a bag of coins. He was doing exactly what my parents and uncles had described. He was counting coins silently, and then he looked at the bench and started whispering. We couldn't hear what he was saying, but we could see him gesturing as if he were having a conversation with someone. However, there was no one on that bench. After a while, he put the coins away, got up, and put the bench back near the wall. As if nothing had happened, he went back to bed. I lost my excitement and became scared. I knew my cousins were scared too because they didn't go to my grandparents' house for a long time after that. I didn't want to tell anyone about what we had seen. As the years passed, I looked for things that might explain what my grandfather was doing. I remembered the jokes he would make about the house being protected and that nothing had ever happened to him because his Negrito was watching over him. He said that all the Negrito wanted was a very loved relative in return. Whenever my grandfather joked about this, my grandmother always got angry and scolded him. My grandparents didn't live there all their lives. My grandmother told me that they had a farm for a while. They moved there because my grandfather wanted to work on it. But after the first few months, they heard heavy footsteps running across the roof every night. Since that house had been there for a while, another family had also worked on it, but no one stayed there. They had cows and other animals. And at night, when they heard those steps running, the cows also got upset. They started to make a lot of noise, as if someone was scaring them. My grandfather would go out to check, but he never saw anything except the cows running around the corral. This happened every night, so they had to move back to the house where we later lived with them. My grandmother said that they never knew what it was. Story 4. Since I lived this, dreaming has become a fundamental part of my day-to-day. When I was 29 years old, 7 months pregnant, everything was fine. I had a good diet, went to my checkups, and had nothing to worry about. One morning, I woke up scared, nervous, and sweating. My husband was by my side and felt me getting up. He asked if everything was okay, and I said it was just a dream. Unlike other dreams I'd had before, this one stuck with me. I tried not to think about it, but after another night, and then another, and another, almost completing the week, I dreamed that a man of very strange characteristics was standing in my room next to the window. He laughed at me and told me over and over again that that boy was his. I remember this man perfectly. He was all colored between red and black, maybe a wine color. He wasn't wearing clothes, but he didn't seem naked either. His face was what I always remembered. He had no hair, but he had protuberances that I imagine were two types of horns, not long or spiky, just a little big, coming out of his forehead. The eyes were completely black, big, and the mouth was also big. That's why I could easily see his teeth, which were like a shark's, sharp teeth that seemed to grow in any direction. And when he laughed at me, I remember crying and hugging my baby. But no, he wasn't my child. He hadn't even been born yet, but I was. Every night I dreamed of him, hugging a blanket, like simulating a baby. The dream never lasted long, but it was always exactly the same. I was always afraid of that man. Even in my day-to-day life, I was afraid just to remember him and listen to what he was always telling me. That the baby I embraced in the dream was his. One of my aunts helped me. She made me a type of cleaning, we prayed together, and did other things that really helped me stop dreaming that, already in my last days of pregnancy. They admitted me to the hospital to wait for my child. Suddenly, lying in the room where I was hospitalized, I don't know how it all happened. I think I blocked that part from my mind because it was all so hard for me. They had to intervene. I didn't know if it was to give birth or if it was because of the emergency that the nurses and my doctor had. Everything was blurry for me. But well, the mind protects us from situations so shocking for us. My baby was not born. He died. I remember asking them not to tell me about it until some time later, when I could touch this subject again. That he had died of a hemorrhage. The reasons? I never wanted to know them exactly. There are so many things that I can't remember from that day when I lost my child, but what I have never forgotten is the tone of voice, the face, the eyes, the body of that man who laughed in my dreams, telling me that my son was his. I never liked to admit it, but that man, or whatever he was right. Story 5. I am currently 34 years old. I live alone in my apartment, and my mother tells me about something that happened to me when I was a child. My father has never wanted to tell me about it, only she. Every time I slept in the living room when I was little, around 4 or 5 years old, I told them that a girl always woke me up. She would move my arm, talk to me, and insist that I wake up. My mother said that I never responded, only pushed her away. One night, I ran to the kitchen with them crying, desperate, and scared because I told them that they had woken me up again. That girl. But now I had seen her. But the one I heard with the voice of a little girl. It wasn't that. It was an eye. Like this, just like that. An eye, something big, with wings that I was seeing floating next to the couch. My mom says that at least she got scared, that my father on the other hand got angry and ran straight to the living room screaming nonsense and all the insult that could occur trying to scare. After that, my mother says that they did not wake me up again. But the truth is, I don't remember anything about that, nor the voice of the one I said was a girl, that someone was waking me up. Or worse, I don't remember that eye either. A brief but very strange story, considering the characteristics of the sighting, of course. I recently heard a video from the channel. You told a story that made me remember something I lived many years ago. I didn't remember that until I heard that story. When I was about 18 years old, one night I was at my house. I lived at that time near the international airport of Uruapan, in Michoacan, with my parents and my 16-year-old sister at that time. I was lying in my room, talking on the phone with my boyfriend. And I ask him to be quiet for a moment because I heard something out there. He stays quiet. I too, and I realize that in the window of my room, which was on a second floor with a view of the street, it sounded as if they were throwing stones and hitting the glass. I did not finish the call with my boyfriend. In fact, I told him that I was going to check what it was, and he told me that he was fine, that in fact he was also already listening to the stones in the window, through the call, of course. Me levanto de la cama, me acerco a la ventana y desde abajo vio que en la calle estaba mi hermana. Me hacía señas con la mano de que fuera que bajara, lo que significaba salir de la casa. Claro, cree que ella se había salido escondida. Si quería que la abriera la puerta, ya que supuse que no tenía llaves. Y si mis papas se enteraban la iba a ir muy mal. I tell her this. It bothers my boyfriend, without hanging up the call at any time. I told her that I would go downstairs to open the door and I would come back. I still take my phone. I left my room, and before going down the stairs, the bathroom door that remains before going down to the first floor opens. From there my sister comes out. In pajama, así como ella se vestía cuando ya estaba a punto de dormir. Sentí un escalofrío de esos que difícilmente se pueden volver a sentir, a no ser que vivas algo así de extraño nuevamente. I keep looking at her, and I think I infected her with my gaze, because before she looked calm, but when she saw my face, she was the same as me, very surprised, asking me what was happening to me. Tartamudeando, I ask her at what time she had entered, who had opened the door for her. She asks me, how? I tell her how I could, since I could barely say a word. Yes, you spoke to me through my window from outside to help you get in. I just saw you. She looks even more confused and tells me no, that she already had a good time lying down. It was not possible. I didn't tell her anything. I just walked back to my room and asked my boyfriend if he had heard everything. Me responde que si, luego me pregunta que si eso era una broma para él, por supuesto que ahí me solt preguntando que si no me estaba escuchando, que casi se me sale el corazón, que como iba a ser posible. And then I thought that in fact no, it was impossible. What I had seen outside my sister as she dressed when she came out at that age, it was her. I am more than sure, at least she looked just like her. And then to find her inside the house, I asked my boyfriend to stay with me a little longer, talking on the phone, at least until he could calm me down. And that's what we did. We talked about something else to pass the scare. And then I gradually forgot about it. Until in one of your videos, in another experience similar to mine that I heard, I remembered it. This song so sounded more and more of the doppelgangers, doubles of ourselves, of our loved ones, known, who somehow interact with us, many times motivating us to respond to them, to approach us. With what intention, we do not know, and we hope never to have to discover. During all my childhood I lived in my grandparents' house with my parents in the modern colony. This was one of those houses not only old in construction, the colony is many years old, they are old houses, but this one has always had that aspect that never advanced in time. So he liked my grandparents, and this, being honest, would have no relevance if it were not, because when I grew up I was realizing many things, like it was sometimes when everyone was asleep, I don't know if I agreed, that I woke up at night for anything. I opened my eyes and saw that outside our room, I slept with my parents. At that time we didn't have a door like that, made of wood or other material, but we covered the entrance to that room with a curtain, one that left a space where you could see outside the room from below, since I didn't cover it completely. Sino que estaba separada del piso entre unos 30 o 40 centímetros. Entonces si alguien pasaba por allí, lo primero que veía eran los pies. Y esa noche vamos a hablar de una en especial. Por ahora me acuerdo que siendo niña de unos 8 años I saw some feet outside the room. My grandparents always left a dim light on in the kitchen so that the house would not be completely dark, and with it I could see clearly the feet of someone older, because they were wrinkled, barefoot, very white. I could even swear that they were gray. They were on their way to enter our room behind that curtain, but they were not touching the ground, they were only there, suspended in the air. I could not see anyone's silhouette, and as my parents tell me, I never told them this with fear. On the contrary, I was very excited to see this, and I woke up my parents by telling them that there was someone out there, that they saw what I was doing, that someone was flying out of the room. Mis papas nunca se levantaron cuando les decía si se despertaban, pero siempre me decían si ya durmete sin voltear a ver, solo me tomaban y me acostaban de vuelta, siempre era así y les juro que esto me pasó un montón de veces. Over time I realized that my parents never wanted to see what I told them when I saw that person floating. I never stood up to see who it was. I remember I had fun, yes, but I always stayed watching that from the bedtime, and years passed, and those sightings never happened. Whoever it was, it always stayed out of the room, and I had stopped seeing it there, because my parents had now put a door that, of course, prevented me from seeing underneath. How they did it with the curtains, when we left there now to our house. Sometime later I talked to my parents about that, in a talk about horror stories we had with some uncles. And when I asked about that, which I did not remember, but until we told this kind of things, they told me that to begin with they were more than relieved of not living there. They loved my grandparents with all their soul. The problem was not them, but well, partly my grandmother, since my parents told me that that house had been owned by my great-grandmother, the mother of my grandmother, but when my father was little she died there in that house. Not only did she lose her life there, but her funeral was in the room of that property, and my father says that on occasions my grandmother spoke to her normal, of course, because it was her mother and we loved ones we never forget, but she as once saw her. My father, he says she didn't look like her grandmother. It wasn't her. It wasn't her. Yes, maybe she had a resemblance, but it wasn't the woman he had met. I remember my dad insisting a lot that it wasn't his grandmother who he saw by the house, also floating. And I was sure that the one I had seen outside the room was also her. The house was never remodeled inside. They fixed from time to time something that was needed like any house, but they always wanted to keep it that way. Una casa muy obscura sin tantas ventanas, los baños con azulejos de esos azules que ya no se usan muy antiguos, la cocina igual muy antigua y era porque decía mi abuelita que su mamá se podía enojar si cambiaban algo de la casa que la tenía miedo así sin más. Solo escuché eso. Mis tíos y mis papas también nunca se mechan con mi abuelita. Respecto a ese tema, Hector Lopez, who lived this, only comments that there in the 80s, near Jilatepec, this happened to him, for which we ask discretion. There is one or another issue that perhaps more than one cannot make him spend a good time. Prefer to omit the exact location of this cemetery so as not to mortify the families who have or had their loved ones resting there. Also, I will take the liberty of omitting the names of the people with whom this happened to me out of respect. I was almost done with my shift. Don Lopez was coming soon, and if I saw that I hadn't finished all the work, I was sure he was going to scold me, just like he always does. I still had to water a part of the garden, so taking advantage of the fact that there were not many people in the Pantheon, I took the hose and went quickly to that part. You know that Don Lopez checks everything with a magnifying glass. As I was walking, a lady crossed me through one of the paths between the graves. También el señor Eusebio. Ellos pueden dar testimonio de que yo estaba bien. No era como dicen, no había tomato. Se me hubiera notado rápido. Cuando llegué a esa party, no había nadie. Comencé a conectar la manguera con el grifo y fue cuando vi eso. A unos 15 metros más o menos de donde estaba yo. Era un señor grande. Una víbora o no sé. Una de esas dos. Enorme, se arrastraba por el suelo como serpiente, así en zigzag. Cuando lo vi, no sabía qué hacer. Me quedé paralizado. De verdad, no podía creer lo que estaba viendo con mis propios ojos dentro de ese panteón. Y vi esa cosa pasando hacia. No sé dónde iba, pero de pronto he stopped, and that's when I felt even worse, when I saw that he started turning to where I was. I could describe them as a huge snake, and I tell you that it was a man because he had the head of a person. Forget it, when I saw that he was watching me, directly from where he was dragging himself, I ran to the entrance of the cemetery, leaving the key open from the water where I was trying to connect the hose. And that's what I remembered when I was already out of the Pantheon. I'm sorry for scaring people, it wasn't my intention, I just told them to get out of there quickly. I didn't tell them why, but I was sure that whatever was being dragged back there wasn't human. Please Sir Martinez, I beg your pardon, but I can't work there anymore. Something is going on all over the Pantheon and I don't want to take a risk. What you have just heard was told to us by Don Martinez and Don Lopez, so we will tell you so as not to mention their names. They said that Sir Cyril told them both as an excuse for all the mess he had made. Don Martinez was in charge of the Pantheon, and Don Lopez, my uncle, the Veiler. El Señor Cirillo era el tan conocido borrachito de la colonia, y Esteban molestos con el por haber hecho eso, y haber dejado su puesto de trabajo. Y no solo era que había dejado el grifo del agua abierto, sino que con eso se había hecho un charco enorme. Y pues ya se imaginaron el desastre que dejó con eso. And some people did get scared when they heard him that day running and screaming like crazy. Ironically, when that night they went to see him, he already had a few drinks on him, not to say many, and this served Don Martinez to convince him that it was the next day minimum to fix what he had done, in which he was looking for someone to replace him. That shift creo que ya les mencioné que Don Lopez era mito y fu por eso que llegó a nuestros oídos este relato al que todos en un pueblito cercano catalogaron como meras alucinaciones producto del alcohol, pues así era la vida del pobre Cirillo. Nadie la cría, mucho menos cuando se agarraba a contar esas absurdas historias muy fantasios. As we also learned that, indeed, he went to work the next day with the condition that it would be the last, but when my uncle went to replace him in the afternoon, he did not find him anywhere. They also did not find the little clothes he had in that precarious little room where he lived. So everyone assumed that he had left the town, fearing that they would insist on him continuing to work in the Pantheon, perhaps. Así fue como yo comencé a trabajar allí. En esos tiempos ayudaba a mi padre en una finca, pero me agradó más la idea de independizarme de él cuando mi tío fue a buscarme para proponerme el puesto. Pero debo reconocer que por poco no lo hago, ya que mi tío quería directamente reemplazar mi turno, es decir, que él se encargaría del turno de la tarde y yo el de la noche. You know that it causes anyone a little bit of scruples to work in a cemetery, and much more at a night time. I assumed that my uncle didn't want that shift for that, but in the end I accepted, not only because I was already tired of the farm and my father, but that practically my uncle would do all the heavy work that corresponded during the day, and the only thing I had to do at night era cuidar que nadie extraño ingresara a hacer daño o cualquier otra cosa para mí era como haberme sacado la lotería y por cierto en ese entonces tenía unos 22 años cuando mi tío se fue, ya era de noche, por obvias razones ya no había personas en el panteón, así que aproveché para cerrar el portón de entrada. Después de eso fui a un patio uno que estaba allí al lado de la casita and sat down on one of the benches to smoke a cigarette. It was my first night at work and I wanted to have the best impression possible. For that reason I wanted to spend it as calmly as possible without causing me much trouble. In the next day I would devote more effort to what they had left me to do. After about 5 minutes, I saw a little puppy approach where I was. He was sniffing everywhere, so I assumed he was looking for food. When he realized I was there, he stopped, indecisive, with fear. He looked at me like he was waiting for some reaction from me. I was never a big animal lover, but if he was in there, it meant he was doing it often. And since I was doing the job that was once my uncle's, I surely knew him. I had no choice but to behave well with him. I made some gestures with my hand talking to him so that he would come towards me and thus have confidence in me. He responded to me as he expected, the tail running happily towards where I was. Después de estarlo acariciando, jugando un poco con él, lo llevé hasta la casita para buscar algo para darle de comer. Esa noche yo no había llevado nada, y lo único que pude encontrar fueron algunos trozos de pan viejo y duro que había dejado mi tío. Por fortuna, los perros nunca te desprecian nada. Así que luego de comerlo se fue a seguir caminando por el panteón. I went back to the same bench where I was and sat down. Not long after, I heard the barking of what I assumed would be the same puppy. But in the meantime, I decided whether or not I was going to check. I heard a bark, like those dogs make when something hurts or hurts them, for a second or another to make silence. Ese alarido se me quedó tan grabado que me levanté apresurado para buscarlo y así saber que la había pasado, pero una vez estuve en el sector donde yo estaba seguro que I had heard it. I could not find it. I was looking for it for a while in the surroundings, and the pantheon was not so big, but it was dark. That was the hardest thing. There was no trace of what it was, or something that indicated that it had been hurt or something like that. All I could see was a single mark left on the ground, as if something of considerable thickness had been dragged, which did not coincide with the size of the dog's body. I decided then that it was time to make a trip. The drag mark ended in some weeds, so it was impossible for me to follow it. I was already going out, because the pantheon was in terrible condition in one part. There was nothing more than a single wire fence, and that's it, and from there on it was a mountain. If it had a concrete fence, the pantheon, but only in that part was where it seemed that had come out, that continued the trail. Lighting with a lamp, I came to where there were some graves that appeared to have been occupied recently, and there I saw that 2 of the graves had the ground removed while a third was practically empty. I felt clumsy and unable to reason enough correctly to know what to do in a case like this. I looked around, but there was no one or anything to give me clues as if to understand what the devil had happened. I could not believe it. I begged God that it were not so that someone had stolen a body from a grave on my first night of work. Really, apart from terrifying, it was a crime. When I saw that same mark of drag on a part, the dog with whom I had been a little while ago came to mind, but it didn't make any sense either. He was too small to dig the grave and take the body with him. Although I was afraid to imagine it, once again I started looking for something that would help me understand everything. But it was useless. Nothing more than pure graves, crosses here and there, the only mausoleum that was already at the bottom. Darkness and silence covered all that holy ground. Sunk in that fear, I returned to the entrance to the pantheon and stayed near the cassette. I no longer wanted to know anything about walking around there again. My skin was itching just thinking that there could be more graves in the same conditions. I stayed there until dawn. I had thought all that time how to solve the problem, but all I could think of was waiting until the sunlight allowed me to see perfectly. That's why I decided to return to that area just then, to see if I could find anything. I don't know if that was worse or not. All I know is that I had a heart attack when I was there. The grave that was completely empty hours before. Ahora estaba toda cubierta de tierra, como si llamas la hubieran vaciado. Y fue gracias a que todo seguía removido lo que me convenció de que yo no estaba loco. Cuando llegó mi tío preferí no decirle absolutamente nada, apenas si me atreví a saludarlo, y me marché de allí lo más rápido posible. I spent the rest of the day analyzing and reviewing what had happened, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing more than pure questions came to mind. When it was time to go back to work, in case of any doubts, I took a machete with me. When my uncle saw me get here with this, he started making jokes, asking me if I thought I was going to fight the little dead that night. Inside, I told myself what he ignored, that apparently, those who rested there, got up from their tomb and after a few hours returned to bury themselves again. It was already midnight when, sitting on the same bench and looking everywhere, this happened. The cassette was about 10 meters from where I was. Seconds before, I had already begun to perceive a nauseating smell, but I did not know where it came from. The sound of a dry blow caught my attention. It came from the drawer, so I quickly got up with the machete in hand to go and check. The smell got stronger as I approached, and when I got to the drawer, "Comprendi porque sobra el suelo estaba ese perito el que me había hecho compañía un rato la noche anterior pero era su cuerpo sin vida su estado era lo que casi me hace vomitar solo de verlo y sumando como olía." I'm not going to detail it completely because I know it's not the case. Just as much as I can, so you can understand what it was like to have it in front of me, and how ugly I felt. The poor thing was all swollen, with his legs stretched, rigid. He had his body covered with dirt, intermixed with a liquid that seemed thick, and apparently it was one of the liquids that release the bodies when they lose their lives. And I remember that what caught my attention the most was the number of worms he had in his body, by the ears in his abdomen and his eyes. I could see it clearly because it was illuminated by the light he had in the drawer. It seemed as if they were going to come out at any moment. Seeing all those worms coming out on one side, coming in on the other side in the poor puppy. Mi hizo devolver lo que había sonado y salí corriendo del cementerio directo a la casa de mito después de contarlo lo que había visto regresé con él al panteón así fue como también pudo ser testigo de todo lo que le había contado. The window of the house was open and gave a very dark area, so he assumed that that damn bastard ran away when he left the dog's body. He asked me to leave my machete and go to my house, that he would take care of that joker and see who it was. I refused, but there was no way for me to stay. The next day I didn't want to see anyone in my house. Because without a doubt they were going to see my face, my expression, my appearance. They were going to ask me what I had, and my uncle had asked me to please not tell anyone. When that afternoon I returned to the Pantheon, I saw him talking to some people, so I went straight to the cassette. Levandome una sorpresa al entrar. Habían dos hombres a los que yo conocía, señores de por ahí, vivían cerca de casa de mito. Sin embargo, los dos traían rifles en sus manos. Mito entró a los pocos segundos y me pidió que me fuera a casa, que no regresara al panteón hasta que él me lo dijera. On that occasion we argued, because I didn't want to be left out of all this. I also wanted to know who the bastard who was bothering me those nights and who, on top of that, had done that to the puppy that had nothing to do with it. But I felt everything changed when he told me that the person they were looking for was not a person. I stayed. He gave me the machete while he asked me to stay hidden with the other two gentlemen, while the Pantheon was running out of visitors, and after that we would see what happened. It was already dawn when we began to lose hope that he would appear, until one of the gentlemen gave the signal that they had found him. At that time I was in the casket in case of doubts. That's why I was the last to get to where they were all. The shots, as I walked over there, sounded one after another, making me understand that they were, well, what do I tell you, shooting directly. But once I was there, it's not something I can believe yet. Even I saw it with my own eyes. It was a snake. Gigantic. Horrible, really. The head, it had seemed to be that of a man, but not at all. I don't know how to explain it. It was as Don Cirillo had described it. Do you remember what I told you? The gentlemen were saying that he had a swollen abdomen, that something had probably been eaten, and, in fact, it was quickly seen that it was true. That thing that was on the floor, it couldn't move well. I think it was because of what he had eaten, and, besides, he already had several wounds. They kept shooting him while he was trying to do what that kind of animals do in these cases, take his food from the inside to lighten his weight and escape. The monster, because I could not tell him otherwise. I was among some graves. I managed to see one in which they had removed the earth to dig it, and you know what that took out of his mouth. Little by little a body was coming out. I remember seeing how the mouth and head of that, I swear I can't believe it, I saw it, but I can't believe it, they widened to be able to take the body out, but he didn't finish doing it, because as soon as some feet, shoes, up to the height of the knees, that stopped breathing, and that's how it was. I grew up hearing stories of Nawalas, those condemned witches who turn into animals, although by that time I had never seen one. It's not that I was waiting to see them, but what I had never heard, at least out there, in a little hill near Jilatepec, was that they also took the form of snakes. Lo que les contaré a continuación con lo que por cierto voy a concluir mi experiencia los semanas después de esa noche cuando fui a trabajar al panteón y le pregunté a mi tío cómo la había hecho para deducir que era tal cual un brujo esa noche cuando fui a buscarlo para avisarlo lo del cuerpo del perro él se quedó durante el resto de toda la noche escondido entre unos matorrales y al final del terreno he found a human body. And he says, I don't know if this is true, that the garments that were next to him were of the body of Mr. Cirillo. He had not left the town. From there we understood. Quien había hecho todo eso quien andaba abriendo las tumbas cubiertas apenas por un montoncito de tierra quien las cerraba pero nunca entendimos qué tipo. I don't know what kind of pact he would have had to make to have to feed on human bodies. Thanks for making this space so incredible as it is today and for making us reach each of your homes through these stories, for creating memories in family, a terror environment or a clear view of the day-to-day. Thanks for allowing me to fulfill this dream that, since I was a child, I saw as something so distant, almost impossible, to be the voice of a horror program. Thanks for all that and more. And know that wherever we get, I hope that always, as long as you are born, of course, is counting on your company. Let's keep growing, always together.